Good morning, everyone. How are you on this Friday morning? Do you all need coffee? Most of you have it, I see. Welcome to the Sora seminar series. I'm Katie Tingley. I'm going to be your MC for today. We've got a great day planned with Tony Lee. He's going to be talking about the role of geography and data integration in predictive analytics. And we'll have a few words from Sora that are going to tell us about the seminar series. And then we're going to hear from our sponsor from RBC, the great venue that they're hosting us at today. Over the next seminar I wanted to tell you about, because we actually have the presenter in the room. Leo Gullman, can you please stand up? There you go. He's way at the back, so you may have to turn around to take a look at him. He's going to be presenting in November, and we're going to release the tickets in October. And the topic is going to be... Oh, Leo, I should tell everybody who you are. You're the Chief Statistician and Director of Data Sciences for RBC. The next topic is going to be on machine learning model testing and validation for production level systems. So first, we'd like to hear from Hugh McCagg from Sora.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everyone. Sora is short for the Southern Ontario Regional Association of the Statistical Society of Canada and Southern Ontario chapter of the American Statistical Association. So it brings together as a local chapter, local organization, two of the major statistical organizations in Canada and North America. More information on Sora, including membership information, is available on the website sorataba.org, or just simply do a web search using the term Sora and Ontario. Now, part of the purpose of Sora is to promote in the broadest manner statistics, biostatistics, business analytics in Southern Ontario. This purpose is where today's event comes in. The chair of Sora Business Analytics Seminar Committee is Alison Burnham. On behalf of the executive of Sora, I would like to extend our great thanks to Alison Burnham, Katie Tingley, and the organizing committee members of the Business Analytics Seminar. These events are a great service to the statistical and business analytics community in terms of educating us, fostering our professional development, and helping us make contacts with others in similar lines of work, and for the advancement of our careers. Thank you.
And now we'd like to hear from Jim Miller from RBC.
Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to RBC. Water Park Place is our IT headquarters for the World Bank. Our group is called Future Makers, so we're the only department at RBC that has its own brand name. Pretty interesting. We're the Technology Community Engagement Team. So what we do is we host a lot of meetup groups in this facility. We're the liaison between the team that puts together events here. We often sponsor the events not only by paying for the use of this facility, but also sponsor the catering, which we've done today as well. And the reason is that RBC isn't just a bank. We're the largest technology company in Canada. We've got 11,000 IT employees, which means we've got the largest IT staff in the country for any enterprise except for the Canadian federal government. As you can imagine, we've got a wealth of data, trillions and trillions and trillions of transaction records from people's debit and credit cards, loans, mortgages, investments, insurance, you name it. And as a result of that, data is a big part of where we're moving forward. We know that we're very competitive when it comes to the other major banks, TD, BMO, CIBC, Scotiabank, and we're quite comfortable that we'll be competitive against them forever. But what we're concerned about is what happens if the world changes and a company like Google or Facebook or Amazon decides it's going to buy up a bunch of fintech and become a bank. That is what the competitive landscape of the future looks like, and that's where RBC needs to be so that we remain competitive through the rest of the century. So we host these events, which draw in a number of non-RBC employees to the event, and that gives us a chance to tell this story. We're seeing a marked increase in the quality of resumes for people who want tech jobs. So that's one of the things. But also, we just want to ensure that Southern Ontario has a very vibrant tech community, because as the world progresses and as the future, as we move into the future, we need to ensure that if RBC needs to hire people to move forward, we can do that because we've got a vibrant community of tech professionals. So thank you very much. Enjoy your day. If you want to speak more about Future Makers, I will be set up at the back for the rest of the day. Thanks.
So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Tony so that you can understand all of his expertise and just how fortunate we are to have him with us today. Tony's going to give his presentation, and we're going to hold questions until the end. So we'll have a brief Q&A, and then as long as we wrap up on time and on schedule, we're going to have some time for some networking at the end. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Tony. As Senior Vice President and the Chief Methodologist at Environics Analytics, Tony oversees all research development initiatives, population estimates and projections, and site evaluation models. An internationally recognized leader in geodemographics and marketing research, he provided methodological guidance in the development of PRISM C2, which I'm sure many of you have used, led the development of EA's Wealthscapes product, and during his 30-year career, directed hundreds of socioeconomic, demographic, marketing analysis, and research projects. Prior to joining Environics, Tony was Senior Research Associate with the Center for the Study of Commercial Activity at Ryerson University, Managing Director of MapInfo Canada, and Senior Vice President of CompuSearch. He's taught geography and quantitative methods at the University of Minnesota, the University of Toronto, and Queen's University. And in addition, he continues to serve as adjunct professor with both the School of Applied Geography at Ryerson University and the Department of Geography at the University of Toronto. The recipient of master's and doctorate degrees from the University of Toronto, Tony was recognized for his career contributions in business research with the 2001 Award for Geography in the Service of Government and Business from the Canadian Association of Geographers, and we're very lucky to have him here today. Please welcome Tony. And I'm just going to set this up for you, which I can't see right now. Here we go, there we go, and there you go, sir. Take it away.
Thank you, Katie. I'd like to thank Sora for sponsoring these seminars. I think they're great introduction to a lot of people to various themes that are currently important in analytics methods, methodology, etc. So I haven't, first of all, I've got a bit of a cold. I was in Europe for three weeks, and I just got back, and I got some kind of upper respiratory infection. So I hope not to cough, but I will drink some water instead, I hope. I last presented before this group, believe it or not, about 22 years ago. I presented a model of untapped potential with a colleague who now heads up Vividea. So I'm familiar with the organization. I've attended many sessions over the years. I'm really glad it started up again, and so I'm thrilled to participate in it. So that's my CV. This talk relates to geography and spatial data and how it can help in the predictive modeling practice. It's really just applied geography in a business context. It looks like what I'm going to talk about is mainly about marketing, but it's not really about marketing. It's about making inferences and using geography as a tool. It's interesting that in North America, this is not taught to geographers or any other social science disciplines. So when I and other people on the educational committee of Environics Analytics talk to academics or students, this is all pretty new to them to talk about how this all works. So that's the main theme here today, is that. So we've all seen maps like average household income in Toronto. We work with these all the time. We understand them as marketers and analysts. And here's one that's an interesting map on education, where this is people who do not have a certificate, diploma, or degree. And the white part in the middle is the upper class or upper middle class part of Toronto, and then we have the two corridors on this side. I know that many people are familiar with this map, and that's, of course, the opposite of high average household income. Here's where we're going. We've all seen the other maps of census-type data. How many people have seen a map of ketchup consumption? And I've got 20,000 other maps like this. People who own Black Labs, people who have a Lexus model, etc. And how do we get these maps? How do we get the inferences at this dissemination area to draw these maps? And that's what I'm really going to talk about. So here's another interesting map of a new product called Cannabis Insights that we just released about a month ago. And this shows people who responded to a Vividea survey indicating that they've used cannabis. I think it's in the last 6 months or something, or last year. So this should be no surprise to most people, but there's some interesting trends on the map. And that area just north of 401 at Bayview is kind of interesting. And so I'm not going to talk about that, but I wanted to get you intrigued about that kind of thing. Clearly, the people who are in downtown Toronto are the biggest consumers of cannabis, and that's not a surprise. So what's Environics Analytics about? It was founded in 2003. It's a legacy firm of a historical set of companies that stopped with our map info and with CompuSearch. We're in partnership with Environics Research Group, which work in the same building upstairs, and we have all kinds of coordinated products. We're specialists in data-driven insights and target marketing and all kinds of consulting related to that. We're Canada's largest marketing service provider. We have about 225 employees right now, many of them in the US. We have 3,000 customers in North America. And we have an advisory board of 16 companies. There are clients that sit down and talk to us about new products and marketing and those kinds of things. So we're plugged into what's going on in the real world. And we're developers of Prism for Canada. And we had past Prism products, and our current product is Prism 5. And that's going to be sort of lurking behind what I'm talking about today. And I'm happy to talk about more later on. This is certainly not an advertisement for that. It's an advertisement for geodemography as a discipline. Here are our clients under 6 groups. As I said, we have 3,000 clients, maybe 2,000 or more in Canada. So we have an interesting set of clients in almost every area. So one of our clients is the Toronto Police, and we have the fire departments of many municipalities, in addition to many firms, especially retailers and oil companies and publishers, etc. So what data is traditionally used in predictive modeling or in modeling in general? Large data sets related to human behavior and interactions. Lots of data is available today. As we all know, it's the age of big data. The data could be customer data, survey responses to syndicated surveys, credit card data, Twitter feeds, etc. So I'm going to be talking about the use of individual household data relating to demographics and behavior. So all the census variables, including shopping, travel behavior, leisure, purchasing, donating, subscribing, etc. So what's the challenge of these data? Because of privacy or small sample size, or both, a large portion of these data can't be really used. I define really used in a sec. Privacy means inability to share or display names, phone numbers, addresses, other proprietary details. Most people know about that in Canada. Go to the US, present a paper in Texas. They say, what's this all about? It's an interesting difference between Canada and the US, or US and the world. Really used means entered into an integrated database and usable along with other data. So it's a whole story about an integrated view of the single client. And unlike the past, much of these data now has spatial references. And 20 years ago, that was not the case. If there was a big survey, many of the big surveys didn't collect postal codes. So we couldn't tie it to a map, really, and they didn't want to. Now we have deals with almost all of them, and most companies in the world that are in our business have access to that kind of amazing data, so we can make use of geography. So why are these databases, data availability, not really useful in analysis? They can't be linked together. And so the point I'm going to make is that quite apart from geography lectures about, what's the biggest export in Nigeria or something like that, we're talking about a different issue. That is the role of geography as an integrating concept. So keep that in mind. So an integrated database requires that all data relates to the same records. I think everyone knows that. So if we have all the data, and 200 variables, 800 variables, or in our case, 3,200 variables related to the same observations, we can do an amazing amount of statistical analysis. And we do that regularly, and some of our clients do it, and other companies in the world in our business do it. So the challenge is the one view of the customer. This is a sort of a side view, is in legacy organizational silos exist so that people in one department have data they won't share with other people. We don't have that problem in our company yet because we're not big enough, but I think in the next 2 years we'll get to the point where one department has data they're not going to share, right? Because it's a whole dynamic here of sharing stuff. Absence of analytical roadmaps linked to business strategy. Methodology oversight is lacking or in the wrong hands. These are side issues that relate to the picture on the right, where the goal is to understand that person in a privacy-friendly environment and how they interact with all those things on the right side. So we need to find a way to take all these rich data and integrate it. So we have incomes and downhill ski rates in the same database. And think about it, that's what we really want. We want a whole bunch of variables that relate to a person as an inferred area, or in fact, just a small area of geography, if that's the basis for marketing. So since preparing and using individual data is not legal in Canada, and it is legal in much of the US in many respects, and not legal in Europe or in many of the other parts of the world, we have a real challenge here. But, as my point is going to be, we have a good approximation. Since about 1977, which is 2 years before I started in this industry, the UK and the USA had developed a geodemographic framework for analysis. And it was called either geodemography, and that's the word still used in the UK, which has 3 times the concentration of people who do what I do than other places. It's now called micro-marketing, customer analytics, or a whole list of other names. So here, all these kinds of data sets are integrated into one kind of master database for any particular project. It's all done geographically. Not in the normal sense of geography, like economics or sociology, but because geography is a tool for data integration, which is my major point. So the major applications areas for the geodemographics industry are marketing and retail site evaluation, but as I just said, we work for the Toronto Police, we work for all kinds of public agencies, health analytics projects, and a whole range of other things where it's important to do analysis. There's all kinds of areas here, including urban and regional planning, that are also key users of what we do. So what are the 3 bases for this kind of analysis? Well, one is the first law of geography, stated by Waldo Tobler in, I think it was 1971. He's still alive and functions in Santa Barbara in the US. The attributes of persons or households that are close together are more similar than those that are further away. It's positive spatial autocorrelation, statistical concept like serial correlation. Second point, birds of a feather flock together. So knowing a person's neighborhood helps make good inferences about a person or a household. And when privacy is critical, as it clearly is in Canada and will become more so in Canada, world, and even in the US, one can make use of small area attributes as a reasonable surrogate. So this is where my marketing colleagues come to the rescue and come up with beautiful pictures. So this is a picture of the first law of geography. This one, which I particularly like, birds of a feather flock together, has considerable truth. So knowing a person lives in Forest Hill generates some visions of what kind of car they drive, how often they go to the opera, maybe what kind of business they're in. And it's largely true. That's my whole point. It doesn't have to be totally true to be an effective device for marketing and generalizations, as long as one keeps in mind that it's not totally true. And privacy is a huge issue, and it becomes a more important issue. This discipline will become more important, right? Because it's hard to fight with the fact that says this person comes from a neighborhood that has this income. You can't scream and yell that that violates something. It's a generalization, right? So this is an important issue that underpins what we do and what other companies in the UK and the US do. We can aggregate the data rather than use it individually. So if we have access to bank data, like the Royal Bank talked about the thousands and thousands of variables they have for each of thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, it can't be used directly, but it could be aggregated, and they could produce a map of people who have bank accounts of a certain kind, right? And we do that all the time. So it's not outrageous or new. Census has been doing this for 100 years, or more than 100 years. They publish data on census tracts, on dissemination areas, on the City of Toronto, CSDs, CDs, etc. And postal codes. That's a key issue here in Canada. 6-digit postal code is small and still privacy friendly. We can publish data on that. There's some issues here with really small postal codes with 2 people, how you deal with that, but we won't get into that right now. So here are the questions addressed by geodemographics. What are the attributes of a segment or the segment of a particular small area on the map? What's the profile of a specific set of customers, subscribers, donors, patients? Where can I find more of these types of people so I can market to them or service them in some way? What's the profile of a particular market or trade area? As a store trade area or Southern Ontario or whatever? And what's the profile of surveyed people who use marijuana or consume some other product or participate in some activity, vacation in Barbados, buy tide, go canoeing? So here's a real problem with small samples. So when we look at survey data and even clients' data where they have 600 clients and we got 3,000 areas, how do we deal with that? That's the fundamental problem here. If we have a small sample, and we certainly do for all kinds of surveys. So small census areas have all kinds of statistics, and they're published by Stats Canada. So we're going to follow that lead, and we're going to say, if we're interested in hip replacement patients, doing a map of Toronto of people who've had hip replacements, and there's only 868 of us. Okay, I don't have that yet. So how do we actually do a map of that or analyze it? How do we proceed with making analytical conclusions? Well, here's a map. I'm not going to tell you, these aren't cannabis smokers, I don't think, are they, Vito? No, but these are people who respond to a survey saying what they do, okay? And we're going to try and produce an overall map of this, but there's clearly fewer points on this map than there are areas. Map is difficult to generalize and to analyze. Now, people who take a master's degree in GIS say, oh, we can do a map of that, and they do some kind of splines or surfaces, but that's a different kind of issue. We're talking about a general process that has some meaning. So the number of DAs in Ontario is about 20,000. I think it's 20,165 or something like that. But most of the surveys certainly have fewer of those observations than that. And most people's client databases where they have full set of records is much smaller than that. So we can't create a meaningful DA level database, quite apart from mapping it. This is a problem. Geographers don't think about this. Economists don't think of it. Sociologists don't think about it. We have good data, it's geographically referenced, but a good deal of analysis is quite impossible. So solution one, this is where I started in the business. I had 10 people report to me who ran regressions all day. So the dependent variable was people who consume wine, and so it would be density. It would be wine drinkers over households as a dependent variable, and the independent variables would be average household income, percent of families who had 2 children, et cetera, right? And we ran these things and we map it, et cetera. But that took a long time. A person could run a regression in a day if they were good and tell a story, and this was before PowerPoint, put it on acetate. This is the good old days, right? Or a punch cards even before that. Solution two is using a geodemographic segmentation system. I'm going to talk about PRISM 5, not because it's an advertisement, it's an example of a geodemographic segmentation system that's widely used. There's 5 such systems, or 6 in the US, there's 7 in the UK, there's 3 in France, 5 in Germany, 2 in Greece, etc., right? So all the developed countries in the world have such systems. So we have a segmentation system that's based on the variables listed here. It's quite amazing. It was developed by a small group of people in our house who know what they're doing because they developed many of these systems in the past. I think this is my 7th. And so we created a system with 68 unique segments. And when we finish, we're going to have a database with 68 observations. Not the 26,000 customers. We're going to have 68 observations. That's the key. That's why geography is the integrating unit here. And so this database will have rates of buying or preferring X, or a penetration rate of people who downhill ski or whatever. And then we can analyze and map these segments at a small spatial scale, which become our observations, not the personal data we started with. So here we have an example of 2 areas on a map. And this is one of these animated slideshows that show that we have some symbols indicating something. That's 4-person households, 175,000 income, speak mother tongue other than English, and have a reasonable education for that top area. And the second one is 2-person households, 82,000, speak English dominantly and are also well educated. Lower household income of people living in apartments. And we can assign lifestyles or segment scores to these based on the postal code. And so that's called suburban success, and this one's called Great Pride. Okay, and so that's how that system works. I must say that some of the public agencies don't like these names like Great Pride. It's uncool to be a government agency and use these words, so we changed the names for them, or they changed the names. So here's suburban success. That's a particular neighborhood, but there's other areas we can find anywhere in Canada that have the same cluster code. There's the 68 segments. And by the way, I brought 6 or 8 brochures that show these things and discuss them briefly if you want to get them afterwards. We have them here. Here are 3 segments. I'm going to show you a map in a second. Asian avenues, diverse city, urban digerati. And you're going to say, well, wonder where they are in Toronto, and I'll show you in a minute. Down below, we have the geodemographic statistics associated with each segment. So 2 of them have incomes of 85 and 88. Mixed education, majority Chinese ethnicity, yoga, participate in yoga, love to eat at Asian restaurants, etc. And there's the map. So let's go back and look at the, sorry. There's the map, and back up to look at the, descriptions. So we're going to make this slideshow available in some form later on, so you can look at that and sit down, take a look at neighborhoods. So the following, next couple of slides, are a simple example of how this system works. And I have to go through this very slowly for undergraduate classes, I must say. They're sort of like, what did you do? And so each of the slides is labeled, so I'm sorry if you're offended. So we take a look at a whole bunch of respondents there. In the first column, there's their postal codes, the DA code, the CSD code, which is the municipal code, CMA code, larger sense of urbanity, and downhill skiing. Did you or did you not participate in downhill skiing? 01. Next couple of fields are similar variables that relate to the database we pulled the data from. The number of people in the survey was 5,000. So then what do? We assign PRISM codes, second last field, based on the postal codes. So we now know for each of these people whose names aren't listed, their addresses aren't listed, right? It's still privacy friendly, we have a PRISM code. Then what we do next, we sort the database by PRISM code, and this is the top of the list. These are all cluster 1s. The next block in the database would be cluster 2, 3, 4, whatever. And this is the downhill skiing rate. Now look at the fifth field, and you'll notice that almost all these people downhill ski in cluster 1. This is the upscale people who live at Post Road, Rosedale, and Forest Hill. So we can map people in cosmopolitan elite, quite independent of the ski example. Then we can look at the people in cluster 1 who have a score on downhill skiing, and high scores are almost all. I think there's 2 DAs that didn't have a high score here. And we can then end up with a list of PRISM codes in the database with 68,000 records, 68 records only, and showing the ones that have high scores and low scores. And then we can map those like this. That's how we get the map. Now, people say, well, that's not really legitimate. Well, it's as legitimate as any other stuff in statistics. It's a generalization. If you believe in the segments have some meaning, and you have to believe that, then this is perfectly a legitimate approach to get that map. And so we can see upscale Toronto has high rates of downhill skiing. Downtown with younger, technologically advanced people have better things to do on the weekend that go to Collingwood, are not downhill skiers. So then we can create a database that has downhill skiing by segment that we can map, we can analyze in many ways, and we can put ownership of black lab dogs, we can put drive a Lexus or whatever on there, or Volvo. Volvo thinks that they're really good cars to get if you're a downhill skier, and that's historical. So here's a downhill skiing map for Southern Ontario, and there's a inset map for Toronto in the bottom, and it looks like outer suburbia is really into downhill skiing. And if you look carefully at Collingwood, it's not really the people in Collingwood, it's people who go to Collingwood, right? But in fact, there's some good areas in Collingwood where people have moved there in retirement or otherwise to have access to skiing. So other uses of this, I mean, there's many, but one of the ones that we really are specialists in is evaluating sites, retail sites, selecting new sites, making proposals to open a site here or a set of sites as a kind of a location allocation model in operations research. So let's say we're looking for new sites in Durham. Well, why don't we take a look at the clusters that really love the retailer, and Pets and PCs is one of them. And we're going to take a look at the location of people who are likely to love the retailer in this map. Now, one of the problems with this map is if you're going to put one location in there to please the people in that particular segment, you got a real problem. You can't put it in the center. It depends on the distance decay of people patronizing the retailer. It suggests you really need a multiple store solution here. So what's the downside of this story? Because there's always a downside of any kind of generalization or set of rules that I've been talking about. So although the geodemographic approach is becoming more and more important in Canada, the number of customers we have goes up every year. We're one of the faster growing companies in the country. In the US, our business is growing as people realize that they can't make use of the individual data they have for a wide variety of reasons. But the downside is the ecological fallacy could take place. And the ecological fallacy says because a small area, a small group in sociology or psychology behaves like X on the average, that all person sets behave like X. And my first lecture in teaching this stuff is you can't assume that everyone who lives in Forest Hill downhill skis. Don't make the assumption. The idea is you want a cost-effective way of generalizing, realizing that you're generalizing. So in the marketing realm, researchers have found that the fallacy occurs, but it occurs infrequently. I did a big project years ago for Time Life magazine where we took a look at people who consumed Sports Illustrated. It looked like they were black because the neighborhoods that had the biggest subscriptions to the magazine were black areas. But in fact, it turned out they were the white people who lived in black areas. Interesting problem. And I've come across 20 other problems like that occur. All of them have a reasonable explanation. Like the people in the eastern provinces who normally consume vodka or gin in the rest of Canada actually drink wine. They're Anglos that live in a French-Canadian environment. So I could go on and tell you 100 stories, but as long as you realize that that's a weakness or a potential weakness, I think it's really important to recognize that. So the other thing is really the segments need to make sense. And one of the problems with being in this industry and being an academic is show me that it works. No, it's actually describe the theory here. And it's very difficult to show a rigorous theory. So you have to actually hear how it was built, what variables were, ask about what weights were put on what variables, and we'll tell you, we won't tell you, etc. But then you should try it and see if it works, because you can test this in half a day easily, and we can help you test it. Other firms in the business. Every country in the Western world has one or more segmentation systems, and there's some shown at the bottom. And some of them, we didn't list our partners because we didn't want it to be advertising. So I'm going to show you some more fun maps. And the word fun comes from other people, but we're going to take a look at geodemographics and GIS analysts, the kinds of maps we look at every day. Then I'm going to talk about some other variables and trends, and finally show some behavioral maps as a final outcome here. So this is a map of people in Toronto, CSC, percent age 65 plus. It's an interesting thing, and I've asked my graduate students to describe the pattern here based on just dark red versus other, but the whole pattern, and see what it says. It's not little isolated areas. There seems to be pockets here, a certain spatial scale, where geriatrics group. Percent families with children. Most interesting thing about this map is downtown is almost childless, right? No surprise. Except the people who live there who are children, right? So this is families with children. This is percent dwellings that are rented. Most people really don't think about this map, but it's interesting that it's not the upscale part of Toronto, up the center. It's the two corridors in Scarborough and up through the old municipality of York, particularly the York segment, which follows the old Portuguese, Italian, sort of Jewish section of the city. Here's a very dominant map that many people in the room may not have seen. This is percent of population that's visible minority Chinese. These are all census variables, by the way. Look at the two pockets downtown. That used to be, the one on the left used to be the biggest one just south of U of T, and the little pocket on Gerrard Street on the other side of the Parkway. But now the concentration way up North, and Markham and Upper Scarborough. Average household income we show at the outset. By the way, there's all kinds of academic research on Toronto indicating that the city's become divided into 2 or 3 quadrants or sectors or classes, particularly U of T research, which is not untrue. I'm just saying there's a whole bunch of research on this. The final map here, I'm going to show that's got the non-census data, is a product that we've been working on for about 9 years called Wellscapes. And one of the variables at the end of the database, we have 100 variables in it, is net worth. And of course, all the banks and many of the insurance companies and investment companies, et cetera, are interested in that database. And it's a very high quality database. But this is people who have money in the bank. Not just liquid assets, all kinds of investments. And it's a very focused area. There's Rosedale, the south area, the one just above it to the left is Forest Hill. Then there's, then the whole area there, Post Road, which has a lower density of people but high net worth. So now some behavior. This is mobile banking bill payments, using mobile banking for bill payments. It's interesting, the upscale people in Toronto are not major users of mobile for paying bills. This is, I think, year-old data, so it probably will change in the next 5 years. But look at the outer suburbs, and there's some behavioral implications here, is that people who are time-pressed because they spend an hour each day in the morning and at night commuting downtown or wherever have a tendency to use mobile banking. Hideous color, I might add, but percent that listen to oldies in Toronto, and it shocks me that even the downtown areas even listen to oldies. I know my son listens to oldies, and I question the fact that when I used to drive to the college, I'd be playing oldies up and down. So I think it's still his favorite music. Very perverse, right? He's not into acid rock or whatever. So, but I would say it's a very interesting and bit surprisingly flat map, meaning the variance isn't as high as one would expect for that. New country. So interesting thing about this map is the Central Business District, or the downtown area, isn't really into new country radio. And one of the things I wanted to ask my colleagues who put this map in their show, so what the hell is new country? And I still don't know for sure what it is, but I suspect the people in the audience whose age is much lower than mine would probably know what that is. This is always a polarized map. Most people didn't realize that one of the biggest selling vehicles in Canada, in Ontario, is pickup trucks. Really, I mean, where my college is, like 95% of people have a pickup truck. I feel very weird driving around in a car. They sort of look at my car. I mean, it's a regular car, but you know, they just don't know they don't know whether to park near me in the parking lot at Home Hardware in Magneto-One. So, but look at this map, and even in Toronto, which has one of the lowest large pickup truck databases, there's whole areas that have a significant proportion of vehicles. Percent that spent over $100 on books in the last year. My colleagues say, well, it's a very flat map. Actually, it isn't. If you actually look at the data, there's some of those areas that spend 2 or 3 times what the others. But look at the area downtown. These are university students. And most of the undergraduates, I don't think, even buy books anymore, but the graduate students tend to take it more seriously, and they do buy books. I think when you take a look at where they live, that's where they live. So here's some conclusions. There's lots of good data in almost every area. Comes from all kinds of sources, including your clients, surveys, Twitter feeds, etc. These data are tied to persons one at a time. So you have a statistical observation in your database, and you know that person did this. And the banks, they know 20 things, but they don't know the downhill skiing rates, or the possession of dog, or the number of people on the cottage, right? That's not in the database, but it could be. Aggregation to small area geography allows all data sets with spatial reference to be tied together in order to be analyzed and derive meaningful conclusions. This is a geodemographic approach that I've been talking about. Socioeconomics and demographics, small area level, can be clustered well to make good-looking, meaningful segments. And these segments can be used to simplify profiling and targeting to make the marketers or other analysts' jobs so much easier, because you can talk about the people who love your store are, and you can list the 5 segments, show the penetration rates, etc., and you can devise a marketing campaign that's suitable for finding new people to go after, either on the ground or through the 20 other ways of marketing. And that's my story.
I'm just going to get us some mics and we'll have a Q&A session. So just a moment.
Okay, so if you have a question, I'd be happy to answer it. And if you want more details, I've got some colleagues here who are good at answering these kinds of questions too. So
You're just waiting for the mic, so if you could speak a little loudly.
You always need someone to start, and then everyone. So my question is, I don't know if it's a more technical question or not, but it seems like a lot of the analytics that you do, because it's spatial, is visual, right? You have to look at things, and you have to see things popping out on maps. I'm wondering about, like you mentioned, spatial correlation. Are there more sort of automated and machine-based ways of looking with this data that, especially if it's very large and highly dimensional, that allow you to sort of pull out things without having to sort of do a lot of visualization?
yes, so the show I created has to be visual, right? So people in here. But there's all kinds of statistical approaches that are now published in the geography and GIS literature that make use of automated routines for clustering, for talking about spatial relationships, degree of concentration, percent difference from random patterns, etc. We hired a professor to come in and talk to the geeks of our company about some of the techniques that have come up even in the last 3 years. And it's quite amazing, some of the things that are talked about and how to analyze them. But yes, the answer is yes. This is not the audience to talk about how to present that unless it's a different talk, right? But I agree, there is. One of the problems, it's quite sophisticated to interpret some of these things, right? Any other questions?
Hi. I have a question about the personalization of data. You say we're not allowed to use any personal information for legal reasons. Companies like Google and Facebook, do they have that same restriction, or do they go to the next level and do a lot of personalized data, do it with similar types of analyses? I was wondering if you could comment on that.
So when I said they can't use it, I mean they can't publish it, they can't talk about Alex's income as being $134,000, et cetera, right? Sorry. But they can't do that. You can't market to a person because of that directly, right? But you can make use of, so if you have a relationship with your clients, you can use the fact that they have $200,000 investment routines to decide how to target them. Yes, you can do that if you have a relationship. And it's all a business of privacy legals, where you're allowed to market to people who are your customers. So the banks have bank customers and insurance companies customers. The banks are not allowed to sell banking products to their insurance customers. So there's all kinds of rules here about what you can do. But some of the subtlety about what Google, et cetera, can do is really quite complicated. I think, as you well know. So it's complicated about what you can do, and sometimes you're right on the very edge of what you can do. And there has to be a lawsuit, right, in order to clarify it. Another question?
Hi, Tony. I have a comment and a question. In a digital digital first world, print is still important. Can you comment about the work that Environics has done with Canada Post with their communication solutions?
I can't, but I think one of my colleagues can. Can you speak to it, Vito? What we're doing with Canada Post? I've been involved in this relationship for years, but I haven't been plugged into it for the last couple because of my R&D role. So,
sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to it. So, as you can sort of just gather from the maps that Tony showed and some of what he talked about, you can get a quick sense of how this type of information and this type of analytics could really enhance any direct mail, traditional print, any targeting that can be done using postal codes, like just the 6-digit, very detailed postal code level, can be enhanced by any of the data that we're pulling together or any of the methods that Tony talked about. So one of the things you can do, for instance, with Canada Post is, we talked about that Steve example and that specific segment that came out as being particularly interesting to a business, or maybe you want to place a store based on that. You can go to Canada Post with that cluster, that segment, and say, I want to target 20,000 people that are Steve, or that particular segment, and they'll be able to do that. So it's a bit more of a targeted approach rather than that sort of mass blast, that shotgun approach. It gets a little more targeted, gets higher response rates. So that's really it in a nutshell.
So they've developed some products as a partner to us so that facilitate people doing direct marketing with print. Yeah, at the back.
Hi, Tony. What would you say of all the different clients that Environics has worked with over recent years using Prism, what have been some of the most interesting or radical successes or success stories in terms of how they apply this to marketing problems? Like, who's had the greatest success?
So let me speak to the one. So I spent a long time working for the Toronto Police, and we were able to take a look at Prism statistics for a wide range of crimes, etc. And I think that was remarkable, the conclusions we were able to come up with. Nothing to do with marketing, but just outside marketing. I thought that was quite remarkable, and I think our clients thought it was quite remarkable. Now, in the public policy range, what you do with it is different, right? If you know that Lithuanians with blue eyes and on a dog are the principal people who commit a crime, can you act on that? That's a different issue, right? But the point is actually understanding some of these segment profiles of people with crimes is an issue. So I'm not really a part of the sales staff. I'm sort of the eldest research geek in the company. So the idea of which ones have been most successful is not my cup of tea. But again, Richard, where are you? So can you comment on ones that you thought were quite amazing?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Toronto Police, I was talking with some people internally in our company, and as I was probing into that study we did, I think what it allowed the Toronto Police Force to do was actually do sensitivity analysis. So they could take our data and actually start to play out sensitivity scenarios in terms of how to allocate police officers. I thought that was very, very cool. And we gave them a tool that allowed them to do that and to get smarter in terms of using data. We have, one of the things that, I mean, I've been in the business a long time as well, and what I love, and even before I joined Environics Analytics, what I've liked, and Tony alluded to it already, was the information is very different than what you can get like on a typical behavioral database, like a bank or an insurance company, where you're looking at what what did they buy, what kind of claims history they had, but you don't know that they skied, or you don't know their attitudes or psychographics. So that's where our information can provide that different lens, and just provides a different lens of information that most organizations simply don't have because they can't collect it.
That's great. And Vio, have you got any other customer VO works with the banks and insurance companies.
I'm happy to give kind of a broad comment, which is, I mean, anyone who works for any business, whether it's a bank, a retailer, everybody wants to target millennials. Everyone wants to understand them, go after them, grow them in their book of business because they know the importance. You can get a sense just from the few examples that Tony brought up on how this research can really help you understand, not just the ones on your book and how they're interacting with your business, but also what are those periphery lifestyle behaviors that you can tap into for marketing, for messaging, and where can you find more of them that are going to make your business successful? And you know, pretty much across every client I've spoken to, this has been a topic that's come up, and it's really helped them enhance those strategies and those tactics within their business.
So the issue is, if you have some clients who love you, how do people become those types of clients in 3 or 5 years? So if you can figure out which segment has a high transitional probability to the segments that love you, you can target them 3 years before they start to love you and help that process. Any other? Sorry, go ahead.
Can you speculate about what you think the future of this field is going to look like? So as people have wearable devices on them, Internet of Things, we all carry cell phones or some sort of device that's recording where we are, essentially what we're doing. What does the future look like in this field where we've got so much more greater amount of deep data on every single individual?
So it breaks into a couple issues. One is what's legal, and the second is what's possible in terms of technology. So right now, you know that if you've activated a certain application and you walk by a Tim Hortons, you can be told to have a special just for you in there, right? So that will become more important. We talked about this 20 years ago, and people have taken a long time to get used to that idea. And now people turn off the device because they don't want to be hounded about buying the tie in their shop and the coffee in their shop. So there's a third element about what's legal, what's possible, and the other is the reaction of people to this kind of invasive, I consider invasive. I was in a cab in Amsterdam driving to Rotterdam 2 days ago, and the cabbie was using an application to figure out where to go, right? And he was hit repeatedly with things saying, stop in and buy a coffee here, etc. In Nederlands, I must say, which I had to learn years ago, unfortunately. I find, so it really is a whole study of the dynamics of human society in the face of technological change. There's all kinds of articles in social psychology and IT journals about how that's going to happen. I stopped reading those a couple of years ago because it gives me a headache. But I think it's a hot issue. Yeah.
So just to give you an example of how this sort of new technology, the Internet of Things, is connecting to the research that Tony's involved in, is right now, and again, privacy is the biggest issue, is finding privacy-friendly data from these sources that we could use. And we all saw what happened with Facebook last year. Like, we're very sensitive about that, especially here in Canada, and even more so in Europe. A great example is we have brought in some mobility data into our organization and begun to work with that with some clients where location data from cell phones is being captured by satellites, and we're able to link it back to all of the great stuff that Tony's been talking about today, you know, based on factors like, you know, where does this, you know, totally privacy friendly. We don't know anything about the individual owning the cell phone, but we can make inferences based on where that cell phone's rested for 8 hours at night, where do they live, link it back to the research Tony's talking about, and now all of a sudden you can get a sense of people who walked into your retailer, walked into your bank, and what's their lifestyle, who are they, and how can you leverage additional information to target them and get more of them, or at least tweak your services to better serve them in the way they want to be spoken to.
Are we seeing any trend then with younger people who maybe were brought up in the age of carrying a cell phone, so they've had one maybe for 10 years already, and now they're a little bit more comfortable? They're not afraid of the technology or afraid of what the data is going to be used for. Is that impacting where we're moving?
Absolutely. So we do a PRISM profile of people's responses to "Are you afraid?" as one of the questions, and clearly people under 20 or under 30 are much less concerned than I am about whether my phone's on, whether I've got my applications open. it causes me great anguish. My son says I'm crazy, right? So you're right, there's a huge difference. And that's a part, we can actually research that have been. So we do trade areas of stores, and we talk about the density of people in the store trade area based on mobile data. And then we look at their home locations so we can actually see that the people shopping at Best Buy tend to be under 30, and they tend to be upscale. They tend to have graduate degrees. You know, we got all that kind of stuff. So, and then down the road, I think Best Buy's still a client, but we could take the products they bought at a store and actually do a profile of people who bought the new kinds of laptops or whatever the ones that we were just talking about, Surface. So we could talk about those who have purchased a Surface in the last 6 months and who shop at the store, and what trade area do they have? Are they driving longer distances? That's the kind of thing we do all the time. So, okay, how are we doing in time? Are you?
Sorry. Thanks. Great discussion. My question is further to the last question, and in Europe they have the GDPR, which is coming into effect in May, and our Canadian privacy laws are somewhat trailing and haven't been updated significantly for the new internet era. If something similar were to be implemented in Canada, what effect would that have on like the collection, stewardship, and publishing of data from your perspective?
So that's a good question, and there's a whole bunch of discussion about that at our company amongst the senior executives. I haven't been attending those kinds of meetings for about a year, but the whole issue is what we do as a company will not change very much because we've anticipated this. Our clients' needs have been changing. They want to do new things that are compliant, but still aggressive, right? And so it really so the issue is how fast will Canadian legislation and rules follow the European lead? Because right now, many companies, many of our clients, big customers, want to be in compliant with the European regulations because they know it's coming in here. So the issue is, we don't think it's going to be an issue for us. We've got all kinds of controls. In order to have bank clients, we have to be ISO, et cetera. We have all that kind of stuff. So the issue is, how fast does the legislation actually force us to do all those kinds of things? So Canada is ready, I think. US is nowhere near ready, but they're fogging, so they're finally deciding that they know they're going to go in that direction, and that's a huge issue. And that's one of the reasons we've become more active in the US, because geodemography in the US 20 years ago was much bigger than it is today. The number of people playing in that field in the US went down dramatically because the emphasis on market to the individual, right? When you have the data, you can actually find Vito that he's married, he's got a child on the way, what car he drives in the US, and you can market that. In a couple of years, they probably won't be able to do that. So our business in the US is going to go up dramatically.
Seen like specifically that's different because I was involved with the privacy legislation about 10 or 15 years ago. Oh, I was involved with the privacy legislation about 10 or 15 years ago. So for clients, like our company is, as Tony said, is well positioned. We're dealing with that. But for clients that are struggling or trying to handle this, one of the big things is in the old days, you didn't have to so much worry about companies transferring their data to third parties. You could bury that. Now, that's one specific thing that when I was going through the legislation that's different. You have to, there's much stricter guidelines in terms of data governance and in terms of who's handling the data. So that's one change that I've noticed. That's to do with GDPR that I think will follow through with Canadian legislation.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Hi, just to answer your question, sir, I'm also from Environics Analytics. Our company was recently certified by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants for achieving a certain high level of data governance and security and confidentiality to take care of our clients' data. Our chief data governance officer informed me that we are one of the very few organizations in Canada who have achieved this high level of data governance. And so now our clients are very assured of our capability of protecting confidentiality and privacy because of this standard.
Yeah, that's a good point, is the formality of it. So as we grew and we became more important and we wanted to have big clients like banks who care about these things intensely, we have become certified. And although it costs, so when you do a project, we have to add 20% of the time to worry about how we retrieve the data and all those kinds of things. It has a significant effect on the respect we get from large clients in granting us or approving our proposals to them. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll be up here if you got any questions, and so will some of the other colleagues afterwards. If you want to come and talk to us, we'd be happy to do so. Thanks again for the time.
So thank you, Tony, for an informative session and for the generosity of your time today. I know it's a tough one when you're struggling with a cold. I also wanted to thank Sora for the seminar series in general and being here, and also RBC for their generosity in their sponsorship. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our next seminar series. So it's going to be held in November. The specifics are going to be released in October. So please pay attention to the social media. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn. And also, if you're on the mailing list, you'll receive a notification. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. As I said, Leo Gullman from RBC is going to be the presenter. And the topic is going to be machine learning model testing and validation for production level systems. Here's the abstract. Building reliable machine learning models for use in production level systems presents specific risk factors not commonly addressed in the practitioner's literature. As machine learning continues to play a central role in decision-making processes, it's critical to evaluate models under several conditions to identify potential defects. In the session, they're going to introduce model testing and validation methods to ensure production readiness of a model. In particular, they're going to discuss concepts such as statistical model criticism, performance uncertainty, model staleness, calibration, algorithmic bias, and interpretability, so how easy it is to interpret. The underlying methods to tackle these issues are essential for the long-term health of ML production systems and should be seamlessly integrated in data science pipelines. So that's going to be in November. Keep your eyes and ears open. We have the room until about 10:15, so if you'd like to mingle and ask questions, as long as we start to move out at 10:15, that would be great. Thanks very much, everyone.